Co-Pilot Podcasts. Imagine putting on a pair of contact lenses and being told, not that you'll look more beautiful, not that your eyes will pop in photos, but that you are now under the protection of the sky itself. That is the actual pitch behind SKYGATE Blue Contacts, and honestly, it stopped me cold. Today, we're diving into the SKYGATE Blue mythos, specifically the product lore behind these lenses, the celestial protection concept at the heart of the brand, and what it tells us about the way beauty products are evolving into something way more than cosmetics. By the end of this episode, you'll understand exactly how this mythology was built, why it resonates, and what it means when a contact lens starts functioning like a talisman. I've got someone here who has gone deep on this, so let's get into it. Walk me through what SKYGATE Blue actually is, because I think a lot of people hear coloured contacts and immediately picture, like, Halloween costumes.
Right, and that's exactly the assumption the brand is working against. SKYGATE Blue is a colored contact lens product, yes, but the way it's positioned is fundamentally different from your standard cosmetic lens. The core of the SKYGATE Blue concept is this idea of a gateway. The name itself is doing a lot of work. SKYGATE implies a threshold, a portal, something between the earthly and the celestial. And the blue isn't just a color choice for aesthetics. According to the product lore, the blue of the lens is meant to mirror the sky, specifically the sky as a protective canopy, something that exists above us and shields us.
So the sky as a shield, that's a really specific image.
It is, and it's deliberate. The lore frames the lens as a kind of wearable version of that canopy. When you put on SKYGATE Blue, you're not just changing the color of your eyes, you're, according to the mythology, bringing that protective sky energy into direct contact with your vision. Your eyes become the gate. That's the central metaphor. The sky protects from above, and the lens extends that protection to the most vulnerable, most expressive part of the human body, the eyes.
Okay, I want to sit with that for a second, because the eyes as the most vulnerable part of the body, that's not just poetic, right? There's something genuinely true about that.
Completely true. And I think that's why this particular framing lands so well. Eyes are where we make contact with the world. They're how we're read by other people. They're how we take in information. They're deeply tied to identity. There's a reason so many protective traditions across cultures center on the eye, the evil eye concept, the Hamsa, the eye of Horus. The idea that eyes need protection is ancient and cross-cultural. SKYGATE Blue is tapping into that lineage, whether consciously or not.
That's a really interesting thread to pull on, because when you mention the evil eye, that's a tradition that spans from the Mediterranean to South Asia to Latin America. The idea that eyes can be harmed, or that they can harm others, is genuinely one of the most widespread beliefs in human history.
Exactly. And blue, specifically, has a long association with protection against the evil eye. In Turkish and Greek traditions, the nazar, that blue glass eye amulet, is one of the most recognizable protective symbols in the world. Blue is the color of the sky, of water, of things that are vast and beyond human control. So when SKYGATE Blue chooses that color and wraps it in celestial protection language, it's not operating in a vacuum. It's plugging into something really deep.
So the product lore is essentially doing what religious or folk traditions have always done, taking a material object and investing it with meaning that goes beyond the physical.
That's a really precise way to put it. And I think what makes SKYGATE Blue interesting as a case study is how complete the mythology is. It's not just a tagline. The celestial protection concept has internal logic. There's the sky as the source of protection, the lens as the medium that brings that protection into contact with the wearer, and the eyes as the point of connection between the person and the world. It's a three-part system, and each element reinforces the others.
Can you break that down a little more? Because I think the eyes as a gate idea is the part that's most unusual to me.
Sure. So in the SKYGATE Blue lore, the eye isn't just a passive receiver of light. It's framed as a threshold, something that goes both ways. You see the world, but the world also sees you through your eyes. And in a lot of mystical traditions, that bidirectionality is really significant. The eye is where the inner self meets the outer world. So a lens that sits on the eye isn't just decorating the surface, it's positioned at that threshold. It's a gate. And the sky part of SKYGATE is the source of what flows through that gate.
Okay, that's genuinely fascinating. And it makes me think about how different this is from, say, a regular beauty product pitch. Like, most cosmetics are about projection, you'll look more confident, more attractive, more powerful, but this is about reception. about what comes to you.
Yes, and that's a really important distinction. The celestial protection concept is fundamentally about what the wearer receives, not what they project. It's protective, not performative. And that's a genuinely different psychological register. Most beauty marketing is about how others will perceive you. Skygate Blue is about how the universe, or the sky, in their language, relates to you. That's a much more intimate and, honestly, more vulnerable kind of promise.
More vulnerable. Say more about that.
Well, when you buy a product that promises to make you look better, you're in control. You're the agent. You're choosing to present yourself a certain way. But when you buy a product that promises to protect you, that implies you need protection, that there's something out there that could harm you. And the brand is saying, we have something that can help with that. That's a much more emotionally loaded proposition. It requires the wearer to acknowledge a kind of vulnerability and then to trust that this object, this lens, can address it.
Which is, when you put it that way, kind of what all talismans do. You carry a lucky charm because you believe the world is uncertain and you want something on your side.
Exactly. And I think that's the most honest way to describe what Skygate Blue is doing. It's positioning itself as a wearable talisman. The fact that it's also a functional cosmetic product, it changes your eye color, it sits on your cornea, that's almost secondary to the mythological framework. The lore is the product, in a sense.
The lore is the product. I love that. Okay, so let's talk about how this actually works as branding, because I think there's a real craft to it. It's not just slapping some celestial language on a product page.
Right, and this is where it gets interesting from a marketing and cultural perspective. The Skygate Blue mythos works because it's internally consistent and because it borrows from real traditions without being derivative. It's not saying this is like the evil eye amulet. It's building its own cosmology. The sky as protector, the gate as threshold, the blue as the color of that protection. Those are original combinations, even if the individual elements have deep roots.
So it's doing what good world building does, taking real materials and arranging them into something new.
Exactly. And the name is doing a lot of that work. Skygate is evocative without being specific. It doesn't say which sky, which tradition, which mythology. It leaves room for the wearer to bring their own associations. Someone who grew up with the Nazar might read it one way. Someone who's into astrology might read it another way. Someone who just thinks the sky is beautiful might read it a third way. The lore is open enough to accommodate all of those readings.
That's smart. It's inclusive mythology.
Very smart. And I think that's actually one of the more sophisticated things about the Skygate Blue concept. A lot of brands that try to do this kind of mythological branding get too specific. They tie themselves to one tradition, one culture, one set of symbols, and then they either alienate people outside that tradition or they get accused of appropriation. Skygate Blue avoids that by staying at the level of the sky itself, which is universal. Everyone has a sky.
Everyone has a sky. That's almost a slogan.
Ha, it really is. And I think that universality is key to why the celestial protection concept has the resonance it does. You don't have to believe in any particular religion or tradition to feel something when you look up at the sky. That's a shared human experience, and the brand is anchoring itself to that experience.
Let me push back a little bit here, though, because there's a version of this that could feel really cynical, right? Like a company is taking something sacred, the idea of celestial protection, of being watched over, and turning it into a product. Doesn't that cheapen it?
That's a fair challenge, and I think it's worth sitting with. There's definitely a version of this that's cynical, where the mythology is just a veneer, a way to charge more for a product that's functionally identical to any other colored contact. And I think the test of whether it's cynical or genuine is whether the lore actually informs the product in some way, or whether it's just decoration.
And does it? Does the lore inform the product?
Based on what the source material describes, the answer seems to be yes, at least in terms of the color choices and the way the product is presented. The blue isn't just any blue. It's described in terms that evoke the sky at specific times, the particular quality of light at dawn or dusk, the depth of a clear midday sky. That's not just aesthetic description. It's the lore being embedded in the product itself. The color is the mythology made physical.
Okay, that's actually a really meaningful distinction. The mythology isn't just on the packaging, it's in the thing itself.
Right, and that's what separates this from pure marketing cynicism. When the product and the lore are genuinely integrated, when you can't fully describe the product without invoking the mythology, then the mythology is doing real work. It's not just a story told about the product, it's a story told through the product.
I want to come back to the celestial protection concept specifically, because I think we've been circling it, but I want to go deeper. What exactly is the wearer being protected from, according to the law?
So this is where the lore gets interesting because it's deliberately vague in a way that I think is intentional. It's not protection from evil spirits or protection from bad luck in a specific named sense. It's more like protection from the weight of being seen, from the vulnerability of having your eyes, your inner self, exposed to the world. The sky protects the earth not by naming specific threats, but by being vast and encompassing. And the lens does the same thing for the wearer.
Protection from the weight of being seen. That's hitting differently than I expected.
Yeah, and I think that's why it resonates with a younger audience especially. There's a real anxiety in contemporary life around visibility, around being perceived, being judged, being seen in ways you can't control. Social media has amplified that enormously. And here's a product that says, we see that vulnerability, and we're offering something that sits right at the point of that vulnerability, your eyes, and offers a kind of buffer.
That's a really sharp observation, because the eyes are literally the thing that gets scrutinized most in a selfie, in a video, in a face-to-face interaction. And the anxiety around being perceived, that's so real for a lot of people right now.
Exactly. And the SKYGATE Blue lore is addressing that anxiety without naming it directly. It's not saying, we know you're anxious about being seen. It's saying, the sky protects. But the emotional logic is the same. You're being offered something that stands between you and the world at the most exposed point of your self-presentation.
It's almost like the law is doing therapy without calling it therapy.
Ha! That's a generous reading, but not entirely wrong. The best mythology has always done that. It gives people a framework for understanding and managing experiences that are hard to articulate directly. Fear, vulnerability, the desire for protection, these are things that are hard to talk about plainly. But you can talk about the sky, you can talk about a gate, you can talk about blue.
Let's talk about the gate part of the name a little more, because I feel like we've touched on it, but there's more there. A gate implies two sides. What's on each side?
So, in the SKYGATE Blue framework, the gate is the eye itself. The lens sits on the eye and becomes the gate. On one side is the wearer, the inner self, the person looking out. On the other side is the world, everything being perceived and everything perceiving. And the sky, the celestial protection, is what flows through the gate in both directions. It protects what goes out, your gaze, your expression, your vulnerability, and it filters what comes in, the weight of being seen, the energy of others.
So it's bidirectional protection. You're protected in how you see and in how you're seen.
That's the lore, yes. And I think that bidirectionality is actually quite sophisticated. Most protective objects in folk tradition are about one direction. They protect you from what comes at you. But SKYGATE Blue is also concerned with what you put out into the world. Your gaze has power, your eyes communicate, and the lens is positioned as something that helps you manage that power responsibly, or at least with some kind of celestial backing.
Okay, I want to take a slight tangent here because you mentioned folk tradition, and I keep thinking about how colored contacts have this really interesting dual history. On one hand, they're a fashion product. On the other hand, in a lot of communities, changing your eye color has a much more loaded meaning. It can be about aspiration, about identity, about belonging to a different aesthetic tradition.
That's a really important context to bring in. Colored contacts have a complicated history, especially in communities of color, where blue or green lenses have sometimes been associated with a desire to approximate Eurocentric beauty standards. And I think SKYGATE Blue is interesting in how it navigates that. By centering the blue on the sky rather than on any particular ethnic or racial aesthetic, it's trying to decouple the color from that loaded history. The blue isn't about looking like someone else, it's about connecting to something above.
That's a meaningful reframe. Whether it fully succeeds is probably a conversation for another episode, but the intention is there.
Right. And I think the celestial protection concept is doing a lot of that work. It's giving the wearer a reason to choose blue that has nothing to do with wanting to look like someone else and everything to do with wanting to feel something, protected, connected, elevated. That's a very different motivation, and it changes the meaning of the product entirely.
Let me ask you something that I think is the underlying question of all of this. Does it work? Like, do people who wear SKYGATE Blue actually feel protected?
That's the question, isn't it? And I think the honest answer is probably yes for some people. And the reason is that belief is genuinely powerful. If you put on a lens that you understand to be a form of celestial protection, and you've internalized that mythology, then you will likely carry yourself differently. You might feel more grounded, more confident, more shielded. That's not delusion. That's the placebo effect operating at a cultural level. Ritual objects work because the ritual works.
The ritual works. I think that's actually a really important point because we tend to dismiss ritual as superstition, but there's real psychological research on how ritual behavior reduces anxiety and increases confidence.
Absolutely. And putting on a contact lens is already a ritual. It's a deliberate, careful act that you do in front of a mirror that changes how you look and how you feel about how you look. SKYGATE Blue is just adding a layer of meaning to that ritual. It's saying this act of putting on the lens is also an act of invoking protection, and that added meaning can genuinely change the experience of wearing them.
Okay, I want to bring in something that I think is a unique angle on all of this, because most beauty product storytelling goes in one direction. It's about what you project outward, but SKYGATE Blue inverts that. It's about what comes to you. And I think that inversion is actually tapping into a really specific cultural moment.
Say more about that.
Well, we're in this moment where a lot of people, especially younger people, are really interested in protection. Not just physical protection, but energetic protection, spiritual protection. The rise of crystals, of astrology, of shadow work, of all these practices that are fundamentally about managing what you let in and what you put out. SKYGATE Blue fits perfectly into that cultural moment. It's a beauty product for people who are also thinking about their energetic boundaries.
That's a really sharp observation, and I think you're right. The wellness and spirituality space has exploded in the last decade, and a lot of that is driven by exactly the kind of anxiety we were talking about earlier. The anxiety of being constantly visible, constantly connected, constantly exposed. People are looking for tools to manage that, and SKYGATE Blue is positioning itself as one of those tools, just in a form that's also aesthetically beautiful.
A tool that you wear on your eyes, which is, when you think about it, the most exposed part of you in any digital interaction.
Exactly. In a video call, in a selfie, in a TikTok, your eyes are the focal point. They're what people look at first and remember longest. So a product that addresses the eyes specifically and frames that address in terms of protection is meeting people exactly where their anxiety lives.
Let's talk about the visual language of the product for a second, because I think the way SKYGATE Blue is presented visually is doing a lot of work alongside the lore.
The visual language is really consistent with the mythology. The imagery tends toward the expansive, wide skies, light diffusing through clouds, the quality of light at the horizon. It's not the sharp, high-contrast imagery you'd expect from a typical beauty product. It's softer, more atmospheric. And that atmosphere is doing the same work as the lore. It's evoking vastness, protection, something that encompasses rather than something that dazzles.
Something that encompasses rather than dazzles. That's a really good way to put it. Because most beauty product imagery is about impact. You're supposed to be struck by it. But this is more like being enveloped.
Right. And that enveloping quality is very consistent with the protection concept. You're not being dazzled into buying something. You're being invited into a feeling. And that's a much more sustainable emotional relationship with a product. Dazzle fades. The feeling of being protected, if the brand can maintain that, is something people come back to.
That's actually a really interesting point about brand loyalty. Because if you've built a mythology around a product and people have genuinely internalized that mythology, then switching to a different brand isn't just a practical decision. It's almost like abandoning a belief system.
That's exactly right. And I think that's the long game for SKYGATE Blue. If the lore works, if people genuinely feel something when they wear these lenses, then the brand has created something much more durable than a product preference. It's created a community of people who share a particular way of understanding their eyes, their visibility, their relationship to the sky. That's a very powerful thing.
A community of people who share a way of understanding their relationship to the sky. That's basically what a religion is.
I wouldn't go quite that far, but the structural similarities are real. Shared mythology, ritual objects, a sense of being part of something larger than yourself. The difference is that SKYGATE Blue is also a product you can buy, but the emotional and communal architecture is not entirely unlike what religious traditions build.
And that's not necessarily a criticism. Humans have always needed objects that carry meaning. The question is just whether the meaning is genuine.
And I think that's the right question to end on, actually. Because the SKYGATE Blue mythos is sophisticated enough that it could be genuine, it could be a real attempt to create something meaningful in the beauty space, or it could be a very clever piece of marketing that mimics the structure of meaning without actually having it. And honestly, the answer might be both. The best brands often are.
The best brands often are. Okay, I want to ask you one more thing before we wrap up. If you were going to describe the SKYGATE Blue concept to someone who had never heard of it in one sentence, what would you say?
I'd say it's a contact lens that wants to be a talisman. And the remarkable thing is, it might actually be one.
I love that. Okay, so when you step back from everything we've covered today, the mythology, the celestial protection concept, the way the law is built and why it works, here's what I keep coming back to. SKYGATE Blue isn't really about eye color. It's about what we want from the objects we put on our bodies.
That's exactly it. And what we want, it turns out, is not just to look different. We want to feel protected. We want to feel connected to something larger. We want the things we wear to carry meaning. SKYGATE Blue is interesting because it's honest about that. It's not pretending to just be a cosmetic. It's saying this object has a story, and that story is about you and the sky and the threshold between them.
And the threshold between them is your eyes, which, when you think about it, is where every human connection actually happens. You look at someone, they look at you, and something passes between you. SKYGATE Blue is just saying, let's make that moment sacred.
Let's make that moment sacred. I think that's the most generous and accurate reading of what this brand is trying to do. And whether or not you buy into the mythology, literally or figuratively, there's something genuinely interesting about a beauty product that's asking that question at all.
Here's what I want you to take away from this episode. The next time you look at a beauty product, or any product really, and it's wrapped in some kind of story or mythology, don't dismiss it. Ask what that story is doing. What anxiety is it addressing? What desire is it speaking to? What does it say about the moment we're living in? Because the SKYGATE Blue mythos isn't just about contact lenses. It's about the fact that we are all, right now, looking for something that stands between us and the weight of being seen. And sometimes that something is a lens the colour of the sky. Thanks for joining us on Copilot Podcasts. Keep your eyes open and maybe let the sky watch over them.